Look at these 3 words written larger than the rest, with a special pride never written before or since. Tall words proudly saying, "We the people."
For those of you watching this, you probably noticed we just uploaded a 37 or 30-something minute video. We're going to try to do this as quickly as we possibly can. It's the same content, so if you don't have time for that one, just watch this one. We'll do it as quickly as we can. Okay. So British inheritance. Questions about that, John?
Yep, welcome everybody to Ask an Attorney. So the Queen died, long live the Queen, King?
Queen is dead, long live the King.
Long live the King, thank you. How does this
we are sad to see her go. I mean, we don't want to break from the funny format.
She's fine. God bless her. But yeah, so anyway, go into a little bit of the succession with that, please.
Okay, so different ways succession can work. There's basically 2 broad big picture issues. First one is whose line succession passes through, whether or not that includes women, whether or not it includes the oldest heirs. Other one is going to be who actually ends up inheriting the throne, whether that's going to be well, I mean, several issues with that. Whether the throne gets divided between all the different heirs, whether it just goes to the oldest heir, whether it goes to the oldest male heir, whether or not women are included in that. Lots of different combinations. Okay. We talked in our longer video about how it works in Westeros, that it's kind of ambiguous. And we said that there's really reason that it's ambiguous in that show. And that's
why there's so much fighting.
Yeah, because they want there to be fighting. And
we don't want fighting.
The way that you get fighting in civil wars is you have ambiguous succession. So they made it ambiguous in that. We read some William Blackstone quotations where William Blackstone says kind of the real virtue and strength of the British system is that they have uniform, universal, and permanent order to mark out with precision who the next executive will be.
Sounds
so
like certainty.
The way that it works there now, they've modified it a few times over their history because Parliament can make modifications to that, but the way that it works now is basically an absolute rule of primogeniture. So primogeniture means one person inherits. It's going to be the king's issue or queen's issue. So the oldest child, issue is a way of referring to children.
Yes.
We defined that in the other video. But yeah, the oldest issue of that king. If there is a failure of issue, basically what it works is, and this is the part where people get confused, you don't just look back one generation. So you don't just say like, well, maybe it's the king's oldest brother. You look all the way back to who the original sovereign was. So in the context of Britain, you look back to William the Conqueror. In the context of Westeros, I think it's probably Aegon the Conqueror. But you look back, and then you trace down all the different lines, whoever is a valid heir, whoever's not a valid heir. It works differently, whether it's an agnatic or a cognatic rule of succession. Ooh. Under agnatic, which is the Salic law, it goes through the line of the female. Under cognatic, it only goes through the line of the male. But you go through who has the second best claim to the throne. You pick that person. That's your next heir to the throne. That was Robert Baratheon's claim in Game of Thrones. It was also Stannis' claim for succeeding Robert because he thought that the heirs were illegitimate. If you've seen that show, that's how it was working in that. But that's how succession works. Works differently in different countries. Britain is absolute primogeniture now.
I think this is where I asked that question on the last time. It was like, well, why a monarchy? What are the benefits and drawbacks to having a monarchy?
Yeah, so I actually will read the Blackstone for that one. But what he says is, wrong page, what he says, history and observation will, so basically he points out that most countries don't start out with monarchies. They start out with elective governments and they eventually transition to monarchies.
So most of them start like voting on stuff?
Yeah, most of them, I mean, because there's people with pre-existing authority in a society and they get together and vote on who's going to be king, but eventually this replaces it with a hereditary succession.
Oh, okay.
Why is that? Well, he says, but history and observation will inform us that elections of every kind in the present state of human nature are too frequently brought about by influence, partiality, and artifice. And even when the case is otherwise, these practices will often be suspected, as constantly charged upon the successful by a splintic and disappointed minority. So he says that basically we can have elections, but those are too uncertain. If we all agree, we're not going to pick the best guy for the job. We're just going to look at the king's oldest son and be, well, we all know who that is. We know exactly who the king's son is. That's going to be the next king. Then we can agree on who the next king is going to be. We avert lots of civil wars.
Good, bad, and indifferent.
Yeah, I mean, and he says
whether they're good at the job or not.
Yeah, exactly.
That's who it's going to be.
Yeah, and he says that especially when appointment of a chief magistrate is alleged to be unduly made, the only tribunal to which complainants can appeal is that of the God of Battles, the Game of Thrones, right? The only process by which the appeal can be carried is that of civil and intestine war. So that's the reason why you want a hereditary succession in countries, because if you don't have it, probably going to get civil wars. Now, we do have a lot of protections against that, the way that America structures our elections, because there's a lot of people that have to approve of something before, or of the election results before they actually become the results. It's not just you and me showing up voting on election day. it's got to be approved by a bunch of different people. So
multiple layers.
Yeah, I mean, there's the Electoral College, right. And then those electoral votes have to be signed and certified by the executive of the state, who has to send them to the president of the Senate, who then has to read and count them, who then has to get the approval of both houses of Congress. And we have a longer video on that that's just on that, talking about how the Electoral College works. Okay. You run into a real danger when people think that those procedures aren't the way that we pick a president. When they think that it's just, you show up on election day and you vote, and whoever the media says is president is going to be president.
It's funny. I couldn't think of an event at all or anything that's occurred in the last, year or so that might go kind of dictate that kind of thought process.
Yeah, well, I mean, and that's exactly what Blackstone's talking about. Whatever you believe about the legitimacy of election claims that were brought over the past election, certainly people believe that the appointment was unduly made, that it was brought about through influence, partiality, and artifice. I think we could really have prevented that if all the different empowered elements in our government had actually exercised their prerogative, done a full investigation of the election, even if they'd come to the exact same conclusions. I think you'd have people with a lot more confidence in who the executive is now than you would have had otherwise.
We always have more confidence if there's due diligence in the process.
That's kind of the way I view it. I don't know why they thought that election challenges were such a threat to integrity of our election. It seems to me that not allowing those challenges is the threat.
Seemed like a further threat.
What do I know?
You're only a constitutional attorney.
Only a constitutional attorney who worked on this exact issue under John Eastman, but that's my name drop. Yeah. But anyway, that's probably where we ought to cut it for today.
Should we direct people to the website maybe?
Yeah, lexrex.org/store. Remember, we don't have a king in America. Our only king is the law. That is a lot less certain and stable than when you have a guy as your king. It requires real maintenance from the people. But I think there are such advantages to a republic, namely freedom, that I think we ought to keep doing it. So that's why Lex Rex is here. That's how we're upholding our republic.
So with that segue, if freedom is important to all of our viewers, and I would suggest, I think I said the wrong word, viewers, if freedom is important to all of our viewers, I would suggest going onto our website, picking out one of these lovely books, considering a donation, because we cannot do this without the support of our true-blooded Americans like all of you on the other end of this line.
Yeah, that's how we fight for liberty.
That's how we do it here, and that's how we do it by looking at the law. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for being part of Ask an Attorney series. This is Lex Rex Institute, joined by the president of Lex Rex, and I'm your host, John Ahrens. Thank you for being part of this.
And check out the long version. I think it's actually more fun than this one.
Long version is actually hilarious, but we know that people, some are
short. We got interrupted by fire trucks like 5 times.
Literally 5 times.
Yeah.
Surprised it didn't happen this time.
Just soundproof these walls.
Something like that.
Right.
Thank you.
Bye, folks.